ESL and ECE, a disconnect. Are English language learners missing out on special education services? Hi, this is me. I'm Rachel Wright. I was going to play a video of myself teaching this to you, but I couldn't get my camera to work this morning, so you get to look at my picture here. I titled this presentation ESL and ECE, a disconnect, for lack of a better term. As I've taught and as I've been in the education field, especially working with ESL students, I've noticed that there's a lot of what I'm calling a disconnect between ESL students who don't need just ESL services, but who also have learning disabilities or emotional disabilities, things like that, that are not being taken care of or not being met by or through ESL services. I've talked to teachers. I've talked with my own professors. I took a special ed class and I asked her about it. And there just seems to be some sort of a disconnect, some sort of a not wanting to figure out what to do with ESL students who have other learning needs, other learning issues. So I did some investigating, and this is what I found. Every day, students across the country go to school. For many, school is difficult. They do not understand the concepts, or they can't read, or they have some other learning difficulty that makes school difficult. Many schools help with this problem by providing extra resources, diagnostic tests to identify learning disabilities, special classes for students who struggle, and other assistive strategies to make sure that all students have the capability to succeed. Some students receive multiple interventions during the day in an effort to make sure they are getting the help they need. When they are diagnosed, an IEP, Individualized Education Plan, is written for them, which ensures that they receive the help that they need. For a large portion of the population, however, they do not get this extra help. Because they are labeled as an ELL, or English language learner, or have LEP, limited English proficiency, they are put in ESL classes, and these are expected to take care of any learning difficulties they may have. Many ELLs languish for years in ESL classes, not understanding, not progressing, not because they don't speak English, but because they have a learning disorder and cannot process what is being taught them. Jorge was born in the United States to Hispanic parents. Jorge was one of my students. I've changed the name. This is obviously not his picture. But he was the one that I really began to be concerned about. When Jorge began kindergarten, he was placed in ESL classes in order to receive extra help with English, since he was spoken to at home in Spanish. He's pulled out about 30 minutes a day and given extra help with learning letters and reading. He was one of several kindergartners in ESL. They all had varying levels of reading comprehension. Again, some students, parents make a point to work with them and try to expose them to English, and some students don't. It always helps if there's an older sibling in the home, obviously, who knows English. Fast forward 6 years when I met Jorge. Jorge is now 11 years old. He's in 5th grade. He was retained in third grade because his reading and his math skills were not at grade level. As a fifth grader, he still only reads on a second grade level. His math skills are also on a second grade level. He is still in ESL. School administrators want to know why the ESL teacher's not doing more to get him at grade level. But the question they should be asking is, why is ESL the only help he's getting? Is it because he was labeled an ELL at the beginning, and that's what he's always going to be labeled? And is that his only problem? Or is there something more? Could he have a learning disability that has nothing to do with language? Over the years, there's been many efforts to make sure that all students were receiving all the help that they need. The Civil Rights Act in 1964. In 1970, it was an act that said it is a violation to exclude children from effective participation in school because they can't understand English. 1970, the Diana versus the State Board of Education, one cannot identify a child as mentally retarded based on IQ tests administered in English. The child must be assessed in their first language and in English, or use nonverbal IQ tests. Another one, Larry P. versus Riles. One cannot use IQ tests, thus tests must be validated for use with the specific populations, namely ELLs. When IDEA was enacted in 1975, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the 1997 and the 2004 amendments said ELs, English learners, are not eligible for services if their learning problems are primarily the result of environmental, cultural, or economic disadvantage. Evaluation and placement procedures must be conducted in the child's native language unless it is not feasible to do so. Example, a child who's been in the American school system for 12 years. Parents must understand proceedings of IEP meetings to provide informed consent. They must know they have the right to an interpreter at no cost. The multidisciplinary team must consider the language needs of ELLs when developing, reviewing, or revising IEPs. So, to backtrack just a little bit, the problem's been around for at least 30 years, more than that. I think that first was in 1970, so it's been around for about 45 years or longer. Historically, ELLs were diagnosed. They were overrepresented in the ECE, the special needs population. It was just easier to dump them in with the special needs students than to, work with them. Finding teachers that spoke their language, those kinds of things. So historically, they were put in. Then along come these acts, the Civil Rights Act, the acts that we just talked about, that said, wait a minute, we can't do this. They have to be assessed in their own language. You can't go just by IQ tests. You have to do this. And IDEA even was good because it said you cannot put them in special education just because of a language difficulty. So at the outset, those looked really good. Well, the problem came when these new regulations kept ELLs from getting the help they needed. All of a sudden, people were afraid, well, we can't put them in there, so what do? We form an ESL class they go there for all the help they need. And often that's what schools do. They think, well, they're in they're in ESL, they're getting extra help, they're getting an intervention that should take care of it. But ESL teachers, as I'm sure most of you know, and I know for a fact myself, are not trained in dealing with learning disabilities and dealing with emotional disabilities. And so, for a child like Jorge, who, in my opinion, has an obvious learning disability, he needs something more. He needs a teacher who's trained in dealing with that. And so I think that's where the problem comes in. We had all of these legal regulations put into place, which is wonderful, that, ESL kids are not all being dumped in with the special needs. But there still needs to be some way to make sure that they are getting the help that they need. So what is the solution? How do we correctly identify ELLs who need extra services beyond ESL? And how do we get rid of the stigma that was created from the historical overrepresentation? Here's 3 possible solutions. They're by all means not the only, but 3 possible. ELL teachers should also be trained in special education. That's really hit home to me. Specialized testing that takes into account students' cultural and linguistic background. Right now, tests for special education do not necessarily do that. There are some out there, but the availability and a lot of schools, a lot of people do not know about them. So that's definitely one that needs to be more at the forefront. And something interesting that I read in my research, careful monitoring of at least a year before any evaluations or recommendations are made. What this is saying is that, if a teacher sees a student, student comes in, or in the case of Jorge, has been in school for a while, it's not enough to just say, after a week or 2, I think this child's got a learning disability. I think he needs to be tested. It's important for the ESL teacher or the classroom teacher to carefully monitor that student. Watch for signs that there may be a learning disability. Watch for signs that it's not just language or it's not just cultural. Especially for a student who is new to the school, new to the English language. And, spend a year. That year is difficult for me to think about because I'm afraid that the student, is going to lose a year. But take a year and study that student, monitor, and then make the recommendation for evaluation. I think with these solutions, we really don't know, but it is up to education professionals, the teachers, the administrators, and the lawmakers to examine the data and come up with a plan. It takes everyone to make sure that our ESL kids are being taken care of. Thank you for listening. Thank you for taking notice of this. It's something that's very dear to me, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.